Hello. I've decided to make a video where I'm going to run through and explain the grammar behind Tokugawa Ieyasu's voice lines from Civ 6. If you already know a little bit of basic Japanese, I think you'll get a lot out of this, but even if you don't know any Japanese, there are English subtitles for everything, so it should still be interesting. I'll just be explaining some of the grammar and linguistic features of the Japanese he uses when he's speaking.
世は日本の将軍、徳川家康である。
So the three things which stick out immediately are yo, nippon, and dearu, and I'll go through each one of those. Yo was a personal pronoun used by noblemen to refer to themselves. The word began to be used during the Heian period, which was a period roughly from the 700s into the 1100s in Japan. The pronoun, however, did survive for quite a long while afterwards. Matsuo Basho was a famous haiku poet, and he wrote The Narrow Road to the Deep North, which was published in 1702. It's quite a famous chronicle, and it features a line which uses the pronoun yo.
世もいずれの年よりか、変運の風に誘われて、紅白の思いやまず。
To recap very quickly, Tokugawa Ieyasu uses yo to refer to himself. This feels linguistically very fitting, as yo is quite a haughty pronoun. It was used by the nobility, and Ieyasu died in 1616, and yet Basho's work contains yo as a pronoun, and that was published in 1702. So it fits the time period, and it fits his character. So I think they did a very good job of using yo rather than a more modern pronoun like boku. The next word that stuck out to me was nippon. I think most people know that Japan is pronounced as nihon in Japanese. However, nippon is also a valid alternative. They're spelt using the same Chinese characters, but what differs is the pronunciation. There is a phenomenon in Japanese known as Rendaku. There are some very specific rules for Rendaku, but what you need to know is that it's a phenomenon where one sound causes another sound in the word to change from how it's normally pronounced. So let's take the word Shima. Shima means island, but let's look at the Battle of Iwo Jima. The Jima is just Shima, the word for island, but what's happened is the wo sound at the end of Iwo has caused Shima to shift into Jima, and this is Rendaku. This is the phenomenon. The shift tends to occur when the correct pronunciation would be awkward to say. So to use an example to demonstrate, take roku, which means 6, and hyaku, which means 100. Technically, they should be pronounced as roku hyaku to make the word 600. However, the word 600 is actually pronounced as ro pyaku, as roku hyaku would perhaps be more awkward to say when speaking. I'll just give 2 more examples of Rendaku before I finish. So the word sometimes is toki-toki. It's made up of toki and toki. It's just the same noun repeated. So it should be toki-toki, but it becomes toki-toki because of Rendaku. And then the same exact principles for hito-bito, made up of the word hito, meaning person, hito and hito, but no, it's hito-bito because of Rendaku. The next thing I wanted to point out with the voice line is dearu. Dearu is the literary, more formal form of da and desu. Da and desu themselves come at the end of most Japanese sentences, and they're known as the copula in linguistic terms. To massively simplify, da/desu, and therefore dearu, tend to be translated back into English as is, am, be, i.e. John desu means I am John. Dearu is made up of 2 parts, the particle de and the verb aru, which means to exist. Particles such as de don't have equivalents in English. This is why when you look up de in a Japanese dictionary, there are so many English translations such as at, with, by, because it's impossible to have one translation of de in English, as de as a particle has just no equivalent in English. English doesn't have particles. But for the context of this quote, we will translate de as. For example, as a doctor, he is a very good doctor. And then to turn back to aru just comes from the verb to exist. So when Ieyasu says Tokugawa Ieyasu de aru, he is saying, as Tokugawa Ieyasu, I exist. or in other words, I am Tokugawa Ieyasu. Okay, now we've done the first line, let's move on to the next one and have a look at it.
わしの命令なしに何も起こらぬ。
From this voice line, I'd like to pick out the following words in grammar: washi, nashi, and nu, as in okoranu. Washi is similar to yo, the pronoun we previously just discussed. However, notably, it's still used in Japan as a pronoun and is often used in media. Washi is associated with elderly people, typically elderly men, as the pronoun of choice when depicting them in media. Take, for example, Markle from Howl's Moving Castle, who uses washi when he disguises himself as an old man. Washi also reveals how Japan could be split into different dialect regions. Broadly, the biggest dialectical division is between Japanese spoken in the east and west of the country respectively. Modern Japanese grew out of the Japanese spoken in what is now modern Tokyo, and therefore comes from an eastern dialect of Japanese. The pronoun watashi is from the eastern dialect of Japanese. Washi, in comparison, is from western dialect areas of Japan and would have been used more in the Kansai area of Japan. Tokugawa Ieyasu was born in modern Aichi Prefecture in the castle of Okazaki. Aichi, therefore, is near the bang smack middle between western Kansai and the eastern Kanto part of Japan. I don't know enough about the historical context to comment on whether Ieyasu would have referred to himself as washi. However, due to his age as an older man and his geographical background, it feels at least linguistically authentic that he would use a pronoun like washi when referring to himself. I'd like to talk about nashi now. Nashi is actually just a modified form of nai. Nai is an adjective in Japanese that means something along the lines of does not exist. So for example, ringo ga nai means there is no apple. Ringo is apple. Nai means does not exist. There is no apple. If the adjective is pronounced nai, how does it become nashi? Before I get to nashi, I need to walk you first through naki. I promise you this is going somewhere. So, adjectives in Japanese, in medieval Japanese, used to have to change their sound from an e to a ki sound and put into the rentai-ke form. Rentai-ke in English can be translated to attributive form. An attributive form adjective is just an adjective which modifies the noun it comes before. For example, in modern Japanese, you say takai tatemono, which means tall building. The adjective takai, which means tall, modifies the noun tatemono, which means building. However, in late medieval Japanese, the attributive form was different. It had to make that ki sound. So to go back to our sample, in medieval Japanese, we'd have to say, rather than takai tatemono, we say takaki tatemono. Do you see the difference? We've gone from takai tatemono in modern Japanese to takaki tatemono in medieval Japanese. This same rule applies to nai because it's just an adjective. So in modern Japanese you say tatemono ga nai tokoro, a place where there is no building. However, if we follow the medieval Japanese rules, it should be tatemono naki tokoro, a place where there are no buildings. Nai has become naki. The relevance of this is that nai has to be naki before a noun. However, if you want to do something that's called a conjunction, so that would be the word and in English. So I went to the shop and I bought bread. And is just one type of conjunction in English. To do that to nai in Japanese, it has to become nashi. And it's interesting, you can still use nashi in modern Japanese. It sounds very formal and a bit archaic, but you can still do it, and it's a leftover from older rules for adjectives. So rather than saying naki, you couldn't say meire naki, you have to say meire nashi. So that connects the two thoughts. He's saying without my orders, nothing will happen. There's a sort of and in the middle there, without my orders, and that will mean that nothing will happen. That's the conjunction in the middle, but you can just change it to nashi. So meire nashi, without orders, nani mo okoranu, nothing will happen. The last grammar point I'd like to note is the nu in okoranu. So okoranu comes from the verb okoru, which means to occur, to happen. Nu is an old auxiliary verb that isn't used in normal everyday Japanese anymore, and if it is used, it tends to be for literary and poetic writing. But what nu does is it effectively negates a verb. So okoru means to happen, but okoranu means to not happen. And the modern version would be nai, so in modern Japanese it would be okoranai. Whereas in older forms of Japanese, it was okoranu. It's amazing, really. There's only 2 lines of dialogue we've gone through, but there's so much you can talk about linguistically, about Japanese and the culture and history surrounding the words that are used. There's quite a few more Ieyasu lines, so if this is a popular video format, if people like this sort of content, I'd be very happy to do more of these and go through more of the Civ 6 and then maybe even Civ 5 voice lines.